difficulties. But again, my name is Michelle. I'm one of the registered dietitians here at the Weight Management Center. And today we're going to talk about label reading logistics, specifically successful skills for navigating the not so fine print of food packaging. So just by a quick check-in, how many of you read labels? Oh, good. So I do have a bunch of informed consumers with me today. Awesome. Okay, so Linda, you do, but you're not sure what you're looking at. So I'm hoping by the end of this, you're going to have a much better idea of what you're looking at and how you can use that to your advantage when you're cooking and prepping meals and food shopping. So, cannot really see me? Oh, all right. I'm not sure. Let's see. I'm not really sure why you can't see me. Can you see me now? Okay. Great. Okay, so let's begin. Today's agenda, specifically the things that we're going to talk about are the importance of label reading, servings and calories, fat, cholesterol, sodium, carbohydrates, vitamins and minerals, the percent of daily values, what that means, our ingredients list, and then what's new on the nutrition facts label. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty packed program today. Okay. All right, so let's start with the importance of label reading. Why is it so important to know what's in your food? There are a couple of general reasons. So the first one is it's a great source of information. You get some awareness, and it also increases your nutritional and dietary support. Because, you know, without just buying food, without really knowing what you're buying, is not going to be very effective to long-term sustenance. Okay, so it's really important that you become an informed consumer. It's not so much just reading labels, but really understanding what it means, okay? And also, it's a critical tool to building a healthy plate and dietary habits for a lifetime, right? So it helps to foster accountability. All of you in program here are well aware of the word accountability, and we're constantly trying to increase that and practice it every day. As well as informing consumers so you can make those informed choices and know if there's something that would be better for you or things that you need to steer clear of. Okay, so first thing, when you look at a food label, the first thing you're going to see is serving size. So let's start out by defining what a serving size is. So a serving is what we call a standard unit of measure. So for instance, this can be represented as a cup of raw leafy vegetables, 2 tablespoons, peanut butter, for instance, 1 slice of bread, a half a cup of pasta or rice, or 1 medium-sized fruit, like a pear, an apple, etc. Okay. This is the reference on the nutrition label of a given food and or the recommended portion of the food to be eaten. All right. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration changed some food and beverage sizes so that labels more closely match how much people actually eat and drink. And that's part of what we'll discuss a little bit later on that has to do with the new changes and what that's going to look like. All right, so this is an interesting infographic because this is talking about serving sizes. All right, let me just make this a little bigger. Okay, so if you look at this, this is what we call food serving sizes getting a reality check, and this has to do with the new label and what that's going to look like. Okay, so if we look at this, it says the serving size changes. What's now considered a single serving has changed in the decades since the original nutrition label was created. So now a serving size will be more realistic to reflect how much people typically eat at one time. So currently, we'll have, for instance, with this pint of ice cream, it's a half cup serving, so there are 4 servings in there, and they're 200 calories each. But now we're moving to more what people realistically consume and using that as a serving size. Well, people are eating a little bit more. They're not eating a half a cup. So now that same pint is only serving 3, and that new serving size is 270 calories. Now, the same thing is going to happen with bottled drinks. So the package size affects how much people eat and drink. So for example, you have both 12 and 20 ounce bottles, which will equal 1 serving, since people typically drink more, both sizes in one sitting. So whereby before, 12 ounces was a single serving, 20 ounces will be as well. Now, I'm just curious, how do you guys feel about that? Do you think that this is a good decision? Do you think this is a good thing for the government to do and now change the serving sizes? Why do you have mixed feelings? And why not? I'm curious. I know what my feelings are, but before I share those, I'd like to hear from you. Okay, so we're back. Can everybody hear me and see me? Okay. All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off. Everybody good? Great. Okay, thanks for hanging in. We're experiencing a lot of technical difficulties today, so I apologize for that. All right, so we were talking about how many calories are in a gram of either protein, fat, or carbs, okay? So how many calories you need each day to lose weight or maintain your weight depends on your age, your metabolism, whether you're male or female, or how active you are, and other factors, okay? But I wanted you to just have that information just so you understood if we were looking at, a piece of chicken and we said that's 200 calories, kind of how you can make that connection of how many calories are per gram, okay? And no, I'm not expecting you to memorize that or be one with it, but I just more information for you. Okay, so I wanted to provide some examples so that I'm pretty sure these are all things that you eat or certainly have eaten prior to programming. So we have beef. So a 4-ounce hamburger patty has 28 grams of protein. And I think it's important for you to know because we do stress protein, right? Very important for muscle and tissue repair and muscle building. So you need protein. Steak, 6 ounces of steak is 42 grams. Most cuts of beef are 7 grams of protein per ounce. Okay. If we look at chicken breast, a 3.5-ounce breast is 30 grams of protein. Chicken thigh, 10 grams of protein. Drumstick, 11 grams of protein. A wing, 6 grams. And just 4 ounces of, like say, any kind of breast meat or thigh meat, etc. 4 ounces is 35 grams. Okay, so just some general information. Most fish fillets or steaks are about 22 grams of protein for 3.5 ounces of cooked fish, or 6 grams per ounce. Tuna, 6-ounce can, 40 grams of protein. Okay, pork chops, the average pork chop is 22 grams of protein. Tenderloin, 4 ounces, 29 grams of protein, etc. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of provide you with this information, which I think is good to just print out and have as a reference. Same thing with eggs and dairy. 1 egg is about 6 grams of protein. A cup of milk, 8 grams of protein. Okay. All right, and then here are just some calorie counts as well. All right, I want to move on to fat. So the 2015-2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans offers the following recommendations about dietary fat intake. Avoid trans fats, Limit saturated fat to less than 10% of calories a day, and replace your saturated fat with healthier mono and polyunsaturated fats. So some examples of those would be, first off, anything liquid, preferably olive oil. Do you guys cook with olive oil? Or what kinds of oils do you cook with? And coconut oil, okay, yeah. And coconut oil, just as a little aside, it's a saturated fat. However, the difference is that there's been a lot of studies done on coconut oil, and it's shown that it helps reduce inflammation in the heart. So while you still have to be mindful about how much you use, it does have some benefits. But because it's a saturated fat, just be careful with the portion control there, how much you use of it, okay? Mostly olive oil, ham, which I think is kind of a canola oil, okay, good. So liquid fat and rather than solid fat is always the better option in general rule of thumb. Okay, that's important to our bodies because not only does it provide much needed energy, but it also allows us to absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, which are A, D, E, and K, all right? And I also want to mention that there are two main types of potentially harmful dietary fat. So one is saturated fat and one is trans fat. So saturated fat is the kind of fat that comes mainly from animal products, okay? Such as red meat, poultry, and full-fat dairy products. Saturated fat raises the total blood cholesterol levels and your LDL, or the bad cholesterol. Now, I want to make sure everybody's hearing me when I say this. It is not a bad thing to eat chicken because it has some saturated fat in it, okay? It's a much smaller amount of saturated fat, and the other nutrients that you get from it far outweigh the amount of saturated fat that's in that. Obviously, if you have a fattier cut of meat, then you're increasing the amount of saturated fat. So that's, again, for example, if we were to choose red meat, okay, if you choose a fatty cut of red meat, it has a higher amount of saturated fat, which would not be good for you. But there are plenty of lean, like tenderloin, for example, leaner cuts of red meat that have reduced amounts of saturated fat. But if it's an animal product, it's going to have a certain amount of fat in it, and a certain amount of that fat is saturated fat. Does that make sense to everybody? Because all this information I know can be a little overwhelming and confusing, so I want to make sure that I'm being clear, that you understand in everything in moderation, and understanding the context of what we're talking about with fat, and specifically saturated fat. A little fat is good, a lot is not, and it's the types of fats. And you also want to make sure that when you're eating your meat or your chicken, that you're removing visible fat and the skin. Okay, trans fat is a type of fat that occurs naturally in some foods in small amounts, but most trans fats are made from oils through a food processing method called partial hydrogenation. And I'm sure that if you've ever looked on a label of a highly processed food like candy, you will see that it says partially hydrogenated oil, partially hydrogenated fat. These partially hydrogenated trans fats can increase the unhealthy LDL cholesterol and lower the good cholesterol, known as HDL. Okay. Now, there are types of potentially helpful dietary fat, which are mostly unsaturated, and they include things like monounsaturated fatty acids. Those are found in your olive, peanut, corn, and safflower oils. Now, studies show that eating foods rich in monounsaturated fatty acids improves blood cholesterol levels. Okay, polyunsaturated fatty acids. This is a type found mostly in plant-based foods and oils, and evidence shows that eating foods rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids improves your blood cholesterol levels as well. Okay, so they come from different sources. They're both unsaturated, but really heart healthy. Then you have something called omega-3 fatty acids. This is a type of polyunsaturated fat made up mainly of omega-3 fatty acids and can be very beneficial to your heart, especially with reducing inflammation. They are found in some types of fatty fish, like salmon, trout, and sardines, and they appear to decrease the risk of coronary artery disease. There are also plant sources of omega-3s, including chia and flax seeds, walnuts, and Brussels sprouts. The one caveat, though, is it hasn't been determined whether supplements for omega-3s have the same health effects as getting it from dietary sources. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about cholesterol. Cholesterol is a waxy, fat-like substance that's found in all cells of the human body. We do need a certain amount of cholesterol. Cholesterol, I think, over the decades has really been vilified as this horrible thing that we should never have, but we do need a certain amount of cholesterol. Our body also makes some cholesterol from hormones, including vitamin D, and it helps our body digest foods. So cholesterol, however, some cholesterol is found in the foods we eat. Now, I also want to make a note that cholesterol is no longer considered this concern on the food label. So when they make the new labels, cholesterol may not even be on there because most people at this point have reduced their cholesterol levels because they've reduced their saturated fat levels. So it's no longer that kind of nutrient of concern that it once was. And so that's why when the food label gets revised, you'll see there are certain things that are on there that weren't on before because we need to have those things. And we're finding, researchers and scientists are finding that the population is deficient in those things. And others have been removed because they're no longer a threat to public health as they once were. LDL cholesterol is sometimes referred to as bad cholesterol. High LDL levels can lead to a buildup of cholesterol in your arteries, obviously lead to cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke, hypertension. Right? HDL cholesterol is sometimes called the good cholesterol. This is because it carries cholesterol from other parts of your body back to your liver, and then your liver removes the cholesterol from your body. Okay, so I just want to review this infographic because I think it's really important to know what happens by age. The older we get, things do change. Okay, so if we look at high cholesterol by age, in your 20s, cholesterol levels kind of hover around 22%. In your 30s, start shooting up to 38%. In our 40s, about 50%. In our 50s, it's up around 62%. So nearly 1 in every 2 American women has a high or borderline high cholesterol. Total cholesterol numbers. So if you register 240 milligrams per deciliter and above, that's considered high. 200 to 239 is considered borderline high, and less than 200 is considered desirable. And I'm just curious, how many of you have yearly checks where you know what your numbers are? You all know your numbers? Good. Excellent. It's really important. I mean, there's a huge campaign, Know Your Numbers. Again, this is just important for sustainability, of long-term health and well-being. It's important to know that. And one of the reasons why is because it's so easy to correct through lifestyle changes, like diet and exercise. Doesn't necessarily mean because you have high blood pressure that you're going on a statin. And one way to kind of minimize that is through things like behavioral change and exercise and nutrition. Okay, let's move on. I got a lot to cover. Hopefully we'll get this done in the time frame. Okay, let's talk a little bit about sodium. So your body needs some sodium to function properly because, number one, it helps maintain the right balance of fluids in your body. It helps transmit nerve impulses, and it influences the contraction and muscle and relaxation of muscles. If you don't have enough sodium, you won't be able to like move your arm and do this. Okay. So your kidneys naturally balance the amount of sodium stored in your body for optimal health. When sodium is low, your kidneys essentially hold on to the sodium, and when your body sodium is high, your kidneys excrete the excess in urine. Now, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans recommends limiting sodium to less than 2,300 milligrams a day. The average American gets about 3,400 milligrams a day, much more than recommended. And just to review briefly, the main sources of sodium in a typical diet, 71% come from processed and prepared foods. I don't think that should surprise anybody. 14% comes from natural sources, the food itself. And then 11% comes from in the kitchen and at the table. Okay. Also, use your salt substitutes wisely. Many salt substitutes contain potassium chloride, which can be harmful, especially if you have kidney problems or you're taking medications for high blood pressure or congestive heart failure. Okay, it can cause potassium retention, which can cause other problems. So just be careful. You're better off not even using that and just experimenting with fresh herbs or dried herbs and spices. So salt versus sodium, what's the difference? Well, sodium is a mineral. Salt is a chemical compound that's formed when a mineral bonds with chloride in another mineral. Okay, sodium chloride is the most common salt, which occurs naturally and is found in water and soil. Right? Salt contains 40% sodium and 60% chloride, which means each teaspoon of salt provides about 2,000 milligrams of sodium. Americans consume about 3,400 milligrams per day, mostly in the form of salt. So the big takeaway here is really reduce or minimize the amount of sodium that you're adding or salt you're adding at the table or in cooking, and start experimenting more with herbs and spices. Okay, so choose these things more often. Foods that are lower in sodium, like chicken and turkey with the skin removed, fresh fish or rinsed canned fish, like tuna or sardines, low sodium or reduced sodium cheeses, low salt chips, nuts, and pretzels, plain rice, noodles, or pasta, homemade or reduced or low sodium salt, fresh frozen, no salt added, or rinsed canned vegetables. And then again, like I said, using those herbs and spices. Okay, these we want to choose less often. So these are the smoked and cured meats like bacon, ham, sausage, hot dogs, and bologna, canned fish that are in salt water, canned foods like broth, most cheeses, unless of course they reduce sodium, salty chips, crackers, nuts, and pretzels, quick cooking rice and boxes of mixed rice, potatoes, or noodles, canned or instant soups, all right, and canned vegetables, pickles, olives, pickled vegetables, and condiments, unless you can get them low sodium, like ketchup, soy sauce, any kind of bouillon cubes, things like that, really super high in sodium. All right. Carbohydrates. Y'all should be familiar with carbohydrates. They're sugars, just another word for sugar that's found in a wide variety of foods. They also come in different forms. So the most common and abundant forms are sugar, fibers, and starches. Carbohydrates provide the body with glucose, which is then converted to energy to support bodily functions and physical activity. So for weight management, those containing fiber are a better choice. For the sake of time, I am going to kind of skip over some of this more intense information. And I'm just going to kind of skim because I want to be mindful of your time. And I apologize for the difficulties we're having that kind of ate into that time budget. So foods with carbohydrates, they trap fiber, which means it takes longer to break down. So you have that extra bulk, and it makes you feel fuller longer and takes longer to digest. That's why we recommend that you definitely get some fiber in your diet. Okay. The healthiest sources of carbohydrates are unprocessed or minimally processed whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans because they promote health by delivering vitamins, minerals, fiber, and a host of important phytonutrients. Our unhealthier sources of carbohydrates include things like white breads, pastas, cookies, cake, candy, sugar-sweetened beverages. These foods contain easily digested carbohydrates that may contribute to weight gain, interfere with weight loss, and promote diabetes and heart disease. A little bit on vitamins and minerals. So we have our macronutrients, which were our protein, fat, and carbohydrates, and then we have what we call our micronutrients, which are our vitamins and our minerals. And they help with things like blood pressure regulation, blood sugar regulation, brain function, digestion, growth and development, protein, fat, and carb metabolism, vision, and wound healing. Okay. The difference between vitamins and minerals, just basically vitamins are organic, which means they're made by plants and animals and eaten by humans. We have all of the B vitamins and the fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, plus vitamin C. We have our minerals, which are inorganic, which means they are not made by living things, and they are found naturally in soil and water and absorbed by plants, which then we and the animals that we may eat. Okay, so examples of minerals include things like iron, calcium, sodium, and potassium. People obtain minerals from both the plant and animal sources that they eat. That's why it is important that you get a variety of sources of your protein and your vitamins and your minerals, not just one food. Vitamins and minerals can be found in beans and peas, dairy products, eggs, fortified foods, meat and poultry, nuts and seeds, seafood, vegetable, and whole grains. I am going to skip over some of this just because for the sake of time, and I apologize for that. This just talks about vitamin D and potassium and the importance of those nutrients. Potassium helps to lower blood pressure, and vitamin D is what we call a nutrient of concern because enough folks don't get vitamin D. You can get vitamin D from the sun and your exposure to the sun, but since we're all worried about skin cancer and sunburn, we put on the sunblock, which blocks us from getting that. And it's difficult for our skin to make it because we're not being exposed to the sun. So that's where supplementation comes in for things like that. And then vitamin D sources can be found in things like tuna, salmon, fortified products like breakfast cereals and orange juice. So just a little bit about that. And I did want to go over the food label because I think that this piece is really important. So as a general rule of thumb, when you're looking at this label, I want you to think in terms of the 520 rule, okay? 520 rule says 5% or less of a nutrient means it's low in that nutrient, and 20% of more means it's high in that nutrient. So depending on the nutrient, it could either be a thumbs up food or a thumbs down food. So if we look at this food label, it shows that saturated fat is 15% of the daily values. So using our 520 rule, is this high or low in fat or saturated fat? Somebody let me know. High. Okay, I have a high and a low. So it's fat, and fat's something that we want to limit. So if 20% or more, it's high in that, and this is at 15, or saturated fat, total fat is 18%. That's pretty close to 20, right? Which means that it's pretty high because it's nowhere near 5% or less. So if it's high in fat, would that be a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Exactly. So thumbs down. Very good. Yeah, exactly. So it depends. But then if we look at calcium, now calcium is 20% of the daily value. And that's like a nutrient that we want to make sure we get enough of. So with this, using the 5-20 rule, calcium's at 20%. Would this food be a thumbs up or a thumbs down with regard to calcium? Absolutely. Good. Thumbs up. So the basic way you want to look at this is to get an easy take on the percent daily values. Your nutrients of concern, so your fat, your cholesterol, and your sodium, those are your nutrients of concern. So you really want to look at those and see that it should be 5% or less. Your fiber and your vitamins and minerals, those are the nutrients you want to make sure you get enough of. So those you want to see around 20%. Those high teens, 20% or more. Does that make sense to everybody? Just as a simple way to kind of be able to decipher what percent daily values means. 5-20 rule is really helpful. Okay. Now, the nutrients that don't have a percent of daily value, the trans fats, the protein, and the sugars. So trans fats don't have a percent daily value because the experts couldn't provide a reference or any other information that's sufficient, right? So scientific reports link trans fats and saturated fats with raising that bad cholesterol, both of which increase your risk of coronary heart disease, which is a leading cause of death in the U.S. Protein, a percent daily value is required to be listed if the claim is made for protein, such as they're saying on the packaging, this product is high in protein. Otherwise, unless the food is meant to be used by infants and children under the age of 4, none is needed. Current scientific evidence indicates that protein is not a public health concern for adults and children over the age of 4, so it's not required there. And with sugars, there's no daily reference value that's been established for sugars because no recommendation has been made for the total amount that we should eat in a day. So currently the sugars listed represents both those that are naturally occurring in food as well as what's added. There's no distinction made. However, changing that is one of the proposed changes that we're talking about for the new label. Okay. Briefly with the ingredients list. So, although this is not part of the actual label, it's still an important component of the packaging in that it enables us to be an informed consumer and know what we're putting in our bodies. So the product ingredients are listed by quantity from highest to lowest amount. That means that the first ingredient listed is what the manufacturer used the most of. It's done by weight. So a good rule of thumb is to scan the first 3 ingredients because they are the largest part of what you're eating. If the first ingredients include refined grains, some sort of sugar, or hydrogenated oils, you can be pretty sure that that product is unhealthy. Okay? Instead, try to choose items that have whole foods listed as the first 3 ingredients. Another good rule of thumb is if the ingredients list is longer than 2 to 3 lines, you can assume that the product is highly processed and you might want to leave that on the shelf and look for something else. Just quickly, if we look at this, first ingredient, corn syrup. That's not a good sign. Corn syrup is just another name for sugar. Okay, barley malt, which is the 3rd ingredient, is another form of sugar. You probably want to put this down. Also, it looks like a small book is on the ingredient package, so we probably want to put this down. All right, I see we're right at time, so I'm going to leave you with this. This is what the new nutrition facts label is proposed to look like. And if you just, at first glance, you'll see that the serving size, first of all, is much bigger. And it lists a bigger size. The calories are right there. You can't miss them. They make them pretty big so people understand what that is. And they've added, if you look under carbohydrates, and then it goes into added sugars. So now people will know how much, if any, sugar is added. So in a product, there may be some naturally from the grain, for example, I don't know, like in a cereal. And then if they're adding sugar to that, you're now going to know. You don't have to guess anymore. And if you see that there's added sugars, you probably want to put that package down. Okay? So for the sake of time, I'm just going to forward here, but I think you will find this interesting to see what the new changes are. I think it's going to really help you make some better choices. All right, so we are done. Quickly, we have another minute or two. If anybody has any basic questions you want to put up, be happy to try to answer them without keeping you all waiting. If not, then I'm going to close the meeting out, first of all, by saying thank you. Thank you so much for being patient. I so apologize for all the technical difficulties we had. And if you can hang on for a second, I'm going to put the survey in so you can put your questions or comments in there, and then we'll end it. And I hope you all have a great day, okay? Thank you so much. All right. Bye, guys.